for our guest. Oh, lockdown. Yeah. I'm super excited to have you. You're looking beautiful. Okay, let's wait for our guest for a little while. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so if you're live with me, I want you to say hi. And let us know where you're chatting from. Are you chatting from Lagos? You know, I'm just so excited. I'm so excited because I believe I'm with my notepad. You know, I'm going to take some notes. So I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to take in new knowledge tonight. Because I believe that the season we're in, we need to be equipped with knowledge. And we need every knowledge we can. There is a lot of fear. There's a lot of people don't really know what to do at this time. You know. So that's why it's very important to have these sessions. You know. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really honored to have you. I'm really honored to have you, Mom.
Thank you. Oh, I'm glad to see some other people are joining.
Yeah, Chichu Debbie, you're welcome. You're welcome. Say hello if you're joining us. If you're just joining us, say hello. Okay. Oh, we have a number. Okay, so I believe we'll get started. We'll get started. So I want to introduce our guest speaker, and I'll be leading to you all her profile. But before we kickstart, I want to be sure that I have my audience. You know, I want to be very sure. So if you are ready for tonight's session, I want you to type ready. If you can hear me loud and clear and you're ready to go, I want you to type ready on the comment section.
Can we have them put whether they're a parent or a teacher?
Oh, beautiful. Are you a parent? Are you a teacher?
Administrator?
You know, yes, we'd like to have that. We'd like to know that. You know, that would be great.
Yeah, you have some good questions for me, but my responses, I can tailor them to the needs of our audience. Okay. So if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, please indicate. Wow, eccentric marketer says she's ready. That's great. That's amazing. And a teacher.
Oh, yes. I am both a teacher and a parent. Okay, that's great.
Double duty.
That's great. Yeah. Okay. So I believe we're getting the audience here. So let me just introduce you right away. So Karen Delgado is a passionate educationist with over 40 years of teaching experience. She has a master's of science in education with specialization in middle level learning. In the USA, she taught a variety of grade levels, K5 through grade 8, that is JSS, and subject level since 1980. Can you beat that? K to 8 arts and middle level science are my specialties. That's what she says. So she's specialized in science, and she was awarded the Governor's Teacher Educational Services Professional Recognition Award for outstanding educational performance. She served in the board of the New Jersey Middle School Association, and she was the principal of Nathan American Academy in Benin City. In fact, I met her for the first time last year at a program. And
reading your comments.
Oh,
thank you. Whoever said that I look young, thank you.
Yeah, so young, so young. Like, I mean, I keep on saying I'm honored to have you. And I met you last year at this program, the NGO, and you were just so full of life. You know, you were so inspiring. Just your smile, your demeanor, everything just attracted me to you. And in fact, I keep thanking God that I met will be answering, and after the Q&A, we will also receive questions from our audience. So I want everyone to listen, take down notes, and you will have time for your questions. Okay, so when we're done with my questions, you will have time for your questions. So there won't be any interruptions. Okay. Okay, yes, considering all the years of being in the system. Wow, yes. So we're talking to someone that has great experience and knowledge in this field. Okay, so I will go now. Now, the main reason of tonight's session is we want to equip parents with the knowledge, with tools. A parent has children in the house, they don't know what to do at this time. I had a dad calling me that, look, I need something to engage my children, and I had about a couple of parents, a lot of parents actually calling me to complain and to indicate that they need help. And I believe tonight's session would offer that help to them, And amidst the distractions, and there's so many distractions at this time, everybody is locked in the house. I know there are some leniencies. People are trying to go out, but we are aware that it's going to take some time, It's going to take some time for children to start going to the conventional classroom to learn. So right now, everyone is still at home, and it's going to be on for a while. So how can parents right now, amidst too many distractions, motivate their children purposefully to learn effectively? Yes.
Okay, well, regarding distractions, I think as parents, sometimes parents are a little bit too difficult on themselves, and not being in a classroom, they may not realize that there are plenty of distractions in a regular classroom as well. And I was just doing some reading in preparation for this, and I read that in a typical classroom, 25% of class And so that doesn't necessarily mean that learning isn't taking place. It's just maybe a different type of distraction. I've also heard educators who are not parents say, oh, well, the students should be able to get so much more work done because there are no distractions like there are in the classroom, meaning other students interrupting or, play or whatever going on. But the distractions are just different. So the distractions are there either way. The other point is that I would like to make, and it's something actually my son brought to my attention, is that this is a real opportunity. My son is a dad of 3 boys, and one of them is yeah. So I went to my own children, and I actually asked some of my former colleagues and other parents that I know last night in preparation for this on Instagram and Facebook and my social media, and just said, what kinds of things are you experiencing? And so one of the things that he pointed out was that this is a really good life lesson to try to teach children that in the midst of the storm is not what is dictating your course. You have a course that you're on, and not only the pandemic, but in life itself, everybody is going to have things that come into your life generally that are distracting to you. And so it's an opportunity to teach our children how to keep going toward the stances that you're in. Now, I can see that you're going in and out. Are you losing me?
No, I'm here. I'm here with you. I'm listening.
Okay, good. I'm not sure, how. Okay, so that would be my first point, to just accept the fact that we will have distractions, and that's okay. In a practical way, as far as distractions, is to just, if possible, find a place in your home that is the least distractible. It might be the kitchen table. That may be the worst place to go. So the other thing is that anything that I say or anyone is going to say is not going to be the perfect answer for every family across the world. There is, every family circumstance is different. Everybody's home situation is different. And so finding that place that is the least amount of distraction, but yet being able to supervise your child well, is going to look different for every person. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that, you're not going to find no distractions. That's not realistic. And so I think just setting a realistic expectation of what that looks like for you and your particular family. The other question that came up, you may get to this about the. Go ahead, because I think we're going to get to this.
Okay. I would just like to summarize every question. Okay, so what you told us, which is very key, is that we should understand that distractions abound, whether in the physical classroom or the house. There is bound to be distractions happening. And when we get that knowledge that there is always going to be distraction, we can now intentionally create a system that will help us cope with child education, even with those distractions, right? I believe that's what you said. And you told us that we should identify places in our homes that will be less that our children will be less distracted. So I believe that, I heard of some schools actually having assemblies from the house. So a child is being dressed up, for school, and everything is created to make the child feel, look, this is school, even though you are not in the physical school, yeah? So everything can actually be created, when we know what is going on and we are intentional about it. So thank you so much for that feedback. Thank you so much. Now, the next question I would like to ask is that we know that our children learn differently, okay? We have the slow learners, we have the fast-paced learners, we have the audiovisual learners, we have the kinetic learners, we have different kinds of learners, our parents even are aware of this, and even though our parents know about this, how can they really identify these learning differences and attend to the needs of individual children? Yeah.
Okay, so someone by the name of Howard Gardner, back in 1983, first wrote the book called Frames of Mind that introduced the concept of multiple intelligences. And
I'd like to get the name. Sorry, what's the name?
Howard Gardner. Howard Gardner. And it was 1983 that he wrote the book, Frames of Mind.
Frames of Mind.
Frames, Frames of Mind. There's plenty on the internet on this subject matter. It really changed the course of the way educators taught students as they became more aware of it. Now, in 1983, I was in my third year of teaching. But I can tell you, and I spoke at the conference that we were at together, I spoke about my fifth grade teacher. Now, my fifth grade teacher obviously was teaching long before 1983, and yet I think all good teachers had a sense of what Gardner put into a book. And he did it in more of a systematic way based on child psychology, with a lot of research and a lot of documentation. But I think it's something very intuitive to most good teachers. And anybody, when you think about back in your childhood of that one teacher that made a difference, that was so exemplary, they probably had the sense that this was true. And in Gardner's Multiple Intelligences, he talks about different modalities. And sometimes they're known as different learning styles. You will see in literature people argue whether modalities and learning styles are the same or different. And it doesn't, for our purpose, it doesn't really matter. But I think parents, if they've never learned about this, it would be really important for them to understand that different children have different learning styles. And if they don't know that already, now, someone was said that they are both a teacher and a parent. So in teacher education, this is something that a teacher would have probably been trained about. But a parent is only thinking about their own experience in school. They may be thinking about the way they learned, or they may be thinking that that's the only right way to learn. Sit your child down, have them in front of a computer or with a book and a paper, pencil, and sit for hours on end, focused. And that's not realistic in the world of it never has been realistic. Gardner just quantified it in his book. But so and you mentioned some of them in multiple intelligences, linguistic learners that are going to learn better through verbal teaching, logical, mathematical, or the kids that love math, love puzzles, love anything that would be along that way. Musical doesn't necessarily mean somebody that is going to be a great singer. It could, but it could also mean a child is going to learn to spell by clapping. And clapping to a rhythm with syllables, hearing syllables, or hearing things, or even mathematical skills. Getting up and marching around the house, saying I know my Nigerian younger grades love memorizing all the multiplication tables and all the fact tables, but to get them up and let them march around the house saying that if that's what you're going to do. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 3 is 6. Let them, they drive you crazy. That may be a good time to let them out in the backyard to do it, but they're going to learn it if they're musical. The next one is body kinesthetic, which means that they need movement. And there's a lot of reasons children need movement. Some of them learn best by movement. Some of them in middle level learning, and that's JSS in the United States. It can be from 4th to 9th grade. It's usually about 5th to grade 8 or JSS 2. Their bodies are physically still growing, and there are parts of their tailbone and things that aren't yet fused. And for them to sit a long time, we think of kids they can play Fortnite for forever. But in a learning environment, they need to move around as well. But body kinesthetic learners actually learn through the modality of movement. So when they're counting, to be moving things around and gathering. We call them manipulatives in school, but as a parent, it can be anything. If you're adding 2 plus 2, 2 beans plus 2 beans, or 2 balls plus 2 balls, a body kinesthetic person needs to be action. They'll learn better by doing that. Working together with the parent. And then interpersonal learners don't like that, don't necessarily like that interaction. They may like to be social. They could still be social, but they're learning. They may just need to be the kind that just, they want to focus. They want to just have that quiet and then maybe talk about it later. Some people don't like when you're working in groups. They find that their partner, they're doing all the work for their partner, and they may not like that. So a way to figure out which way works best for your child. And then he actually later on added a last one called a naturalist, which means children that learn, or people, not just children, but people that learn best when they see things from more of nature. And so all of us have all of these modalities, but usually we usually have certain ones that are our strengths. And if anyone's really interested, there are plenty of online materials on this that you can actually take little quizzes and figure out what your learning strength is. But you can see me talking with my hands. And when I teach, I'm a visual learner. I tend to be a visual teacher. And so I always have to say to my students, I'm a visual teacher. You need to be looking at me because I'm going to show you things. I'm going to, use hand gestures in my teaching. And at the same time, I need to realize that not every student is a visual learner. And so as a teacher, I need to make sure that my teaching includes all of these modalities. But in a home setting, knowing, and you probably have most parents would have somewhat of an intuition as to how their children learn best anyway. But now that you're doing it more formally, sometimes I think parents are afraid to let their child do something that's a little bit different than maybe they grew up doing. So I would say, it would be worth learning, at least observing your child and see what works best for your child, and encouraging them. My son happens to also be a sports person and has done some coaching in his life. And he made the suggestion of starting with an activity that is your child's strength, then moving to having them do things that maybe are not their strength, and then finishing the day with something that is their strength. And so that would go to, I guess, if you're coaching, you coach, in a sport, you would be coaching to a person's weakness, but playing to their strength.
Oh my, that's powerful. I want to write that down.
Yeah, I often have said that to students. You don't use these things as excuses. You identify your strengths. You play to your strengths. You work on your weaknesses. So
okay, so I like that term. I want us to get something. I don't want to miss anything. I want you to please repeat that term. Play to your child's weakness. Okay.
Yeah. Work where you're going to work on your child's weaknesses. Play to their strengths.
Oh, okay.
So think about coaching. If you're you would say footballer, a soccer player. If you're coaching a child in football and their skill set is not great at, shooting, then that's in practice, that's what you're going to work at. But in a game situation, you're going to play to their strength. And so playing to their strength, working on their weaknesses. Or as a student, if you're the student that is not a good writer, but you're great with technology and you're working in a group, volunteer. Be the first person to say, I'll put it on the computer. If you're the person that's good at art, you say, I'll be the person that will, do the visual part of this project. And so, you can adapt that to the home situation, even with chores around the house, that day, playing to their strengths, letting them start their day, kickstart with something that they're good at, and then moving towards something that may be more taxing, and then ending the day with something positive. It depends on what the schools are doing. My school right now, the students have certain days to work on certain subjects, and within a broad time span. So my students are online, they're online at their own pace. I know other schools have certain times where the kids must be online at that certain time. And so some of this, may or may not apply, but generally speaking, especially when you're offline, to let your kids have that time where they can learn differently. And just because the teacher gives a particular assignment of, let's say, math problems, pencil, paper, it doesn't mean that you as a parent can't give the child some beans to use to count or give them some blocks to build with. You can add to what the teacher has put out there.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. In fact, I just kept on listening. I didn't want to interrupt you because I was getting so much. I was getting so much. The thing is, before I go on, I want to welcome those that joined us while she was talking. Rotimi and Yitayo, you are welcome. That's one of our guests for this month. Misty Edu, you're welcome. Ayuken, you're welcome. Bell Africana, you are welcome. Okay, so what have we been talking about? How can parents actually help their children to learn purposefully at this time? Even in the post-COVID-19 period, and I'm getting so much. And a lot of times we get our parents really want to box up our children. We want our children to learn in a particular way because we feel that that's the best way. But when you said kinesthetic learner and you made mention of the musical learner, I remember Akila and the Bee. I remember Akila and the Bee, and I saw that movie, and I was seeing how Akila was able to learn from her coach by jumping and skipping, and I said, wow. So if that was not identified, that would have been just, and a lot of children learn that way. And I have a baby, and I always notice her always jumping. She's always jumping, she's always hyperactive. And if I want her to always sit still, I might miss out on her strengths. I might miss out on how she learns naturally. So like you said, from observation, we should be able to understand how our children learn, because that's the more effective way. So while we are working on their weaknesses, we are playing to their strengths, ensuring that they volunteer their services in the areas where they are very strong. So wow, I've been learning so much. Look, if you're watching this session, I want you to take down notes because I've gotten so much already, and I'm so excited about this. So let's get on to our next question. I had so many questions to ask you, but you've just been answering them from this few ones already. Okay, but you know how difficult it is for even adults to have to actually instill self-discipline when you're learning online. There for adults. So how can parents actually ensure that same self-discipline for their children? Because a mother will be cooking in the kitchen, will be probably attending to many things, and the student is expected to sit still and probably listen or attend a live session. So how can that self-discipline be instilled in our children? How can we do that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because again, everyone that I'm talking to, there are no two schools that are doing this the same way. And even within a school, there are no two teachers that are doing this the same way. So I think one of the things that I've gathered from listening to people is that there are no real easy answers here. I think anytime you're talking about self-discipline, the parent modeling that is probably going to be the first step. Having a schedule that works for your family. Again, it's going to look different for every family. Some families are very much into a very time-oriented schedule, whereas other people are just naturally more laid back in their family atmosphere. And both of those can work well, but I think the discipline of that is where it comes into. So if you're sleeping in until 10 in the morning and that works for you, that's fine. There's no right or wrong here to doing this. But I would just say to have a schedule of some kind. If you're very regimented and that works for you and that works for your children, fine. If it doesn't, throw it out the window and come up with something else. If working from 10 o'clock to 10:10 on this particular thing is becoming a battle, then just say between 10 and 11, we're going to get to this at some point in time. The only difference would be is if you have the online scheduled learning, then it would have to be. The other thing is to be using a reward system of some kind. There's another person that I know that has made a really good point to say that there's a difference between rewards and bribes. So rewards is a system where a student is working towards a reward, or your child at home is working for a reward, for good behavior, good work habits, not being rewarded because you didn't do something bad. That's a bribe. So you're not giving a cookie because, he didn't interrupt. You are rewarding them because they were on point, on task, doing what you had expected them to do. And so in one of my other sessions, we talked about something that actually my grown daughter had in her first grade class. Her first grade teacher used a marble jar. And when the kids did something well, they got to put a marble. They did something they shouldn't. They had to take the marble out. And the teacher had it marked on the jar. And as a class, they worked together on this. And when the class earned a certain level of their marbles in this jar, they got something special. So at home, you could have any type of a container, anything. You may not have marbles, but you might have beans or pebbles or buttons or anything like that. That if the child, focused 5 minutes, put a marble, put a bean in your jar. If they're not, then take a bean out of your jar. But have it be something that, they're working up to. That if you get to this level, then mommy's going to sit down and play a game with you. Or if you get to this level, we're going to go outside and play for an extra 5 minutes. Or I would not do it with food. I have my own reasons for that. But,
yes, true.
Just positive things that a child will be looking forward to. Middle school, they always want their screen time. Their interaction with their friends is sometimes something that you can use for encouragement. I wouldn't start paying kids to do their online, but I mean, each family, again, is going to be different, but find what works for your child. I have two children. When they were young, my daughter did really well with charts and stickers. If she had a chart and she had a sticker, we had a goal. We could attain the goal based on those stickers. My son could care less about stickers. He could care less. He could care less about charts. That did not work for him at all. And it was my same house, my same person, my same expectations, but two different children with two very different ways of motivating. So that would be my other encouragement, is to find, we really need to find out what works for your individual children, and then what works within your family dynamics. And also, we all need, especially the teachers that are listening, administrators that are listening, we need to realize that parents do not have the supplies in their home to maybe do everything that we would like them to do. So I teach science. I expect my students to be doing science experiments in their kitchen when maybe, food is hard to come by. Here in America, I went to the store the other day. I could not buy tissues. I could not buy soap, hand soap. There was no soap. 2 stores, no hand soap. So it's really hard as an educator to say, oh, we'll do this, do that. I mean, people may be running out of supplies. People may be running out of paper. People may be running out of things. So I think we have to be mindful of that, but not to let that stop us, because there's always other things that you can use. So for me to say, oh, use stickers, well, you may not have stickers. You may not be able to buy stickers anytime soon, but there are other ways that you can chart.
So motivate them. Yes.
Yeah. Even if it's tally marks.
Wow, yeah, true. That's very, very insightful, yeah, because and that's a teachable moment for even teachers in the classroom, because a lot of times we use a single motivation system to reward every kind of learner in our class. So you give a child a sticker and the other child doesn't even care, because giving me a sticker doesn't really matter. You can give me a sticker and it doesn't make me motivated. It doesn't motivate me. But for the other child, it's a big deal. It's a big deal for the other child. So that's actually a teachable moment for educators, for parents. So you can have two children, but you have to understand what is their unique motivation system, and play along, to get the best result. So that's what I was able to get from your answer tonight. That is very important, and I believe we are all listening. I want to appreciate everyone coming online. Nadi Schools, Macordy, Welcome, Freddie. Freda Idahosa.
Yes.
Oh, you're welcome. Hey, Freda Idahosa, you're welcome. Oduwari, you are welcome. And it's been an insightful moment here, talking about how child education can be effective even in this post-COVID season. And we've learned so many things, how we can motivate our children in the way they should be motivated, how we can play to the strengths of our children, while working on their weaknesses. And we've also learned how we can be intentional about the distractions that go on in the home, And I would like to ask one more question, or maybe two more, right? Maybe two more. Okay. I know we're taking so much of your time, but we're almost done here. Okay. How can parents that do not have an e-learning program at this time. Not every school has a plan, right? Not every school has an e-learning program well thought out for. And even those that have, there are some that are not really satisfactory, So what do parents do at this time? Knowing fully well that my child was attending before COVID is not having plans for e-learning. What should I do? Should I just I know. There are so many things, but what can a parent do? What's the best thing a parent can do at this time in the area of e-learning? Yeah.
Let me step back for just a minute. Again, there's probably three categories here. We have schools that maybe are not set up at all to do anything. We have schools that were already on technology. The kids were already online. The kids were already engaged in technology. It was a little bit easier to switch over. And then the middle of the road are, people had technology, but it was just more for, you're out someplace, you hand your child the device just to keep them quiet. It wasn't anything intentional. So I think it's really hard because it varies. And it varies here in the U.S. too. Not everybody here has technology. Not everybody here has Wi-Fi. And one of the funny things that I've noticed is in asking parents and in listening to some of the other Insta Lives that I've heard, are parents saying we want our kids to have less screen time and for the teachers to give them more. So if you're in a position where you don't have, I would not feel badly about that, because those who do are saying it's almost too much. So I think there's a balance here that has to happen. If the school has no plans whatsoever, and you're a Nigerian parent, you have a national curriculum. And so if you are able to access that, I know Nerdic had a website at one time that I know I was able to access the national curriculum, and the scope and sequence. If you have your textbooks at home, some of the textbooks I know that we were using at Nathan American Academy actually had that printed in the front of the textbook or in the back of the textbook. That would be a guiding to at least kind of the topics that would be being covered. If the school doesn't want you to move forward, just reviewing what the child has already done in the past. They're all going to catch up. All these kids are going to catch up. Kids are very resilient. I would not waste a lot of sleep, losing sleep over this. If you have technology and you don't have a lot of guidance, we could probably come up with a list of decent websites. I would stick with websites that have .edu, .gov attached to them. Stay away from the .com sites. I personally like sciencebuddies.org. They have a lot of activities on there for all different age groups. But we could probably, provide something like that to parents that don't have it all. It's easy to say. Sorry about that. It's easy to say Google it, but then it's so overwhelming because there's so much out there. And that's actually one of my former teachers in Nigeria was asking me, and maybe I'll ask you offline later, about finding good materials that are not necessarily YouTube. Because if a teacher is using up their data to search out all of this, it becomes a little bit overwhelming. Let me just take a drink just a minute.
Oh, please do. We've been talking for a long time. Please do. Sorry.
And then, learning doesn't have to happen on technology. So, if you have an idea of what you need to cover and the technology's not there, your power is out, your battery, can't be recharged. As long as you know the topics that the kids are learning, you can always have them do activities offline. I learned without technology, and I'm here today to talk about it.
Right.
I didn't have computers in my classroom until whenever they came in the classroom. I don't remember. But certainly the teacher that I speak so highly about, my 5th grade teacher, back when I was 10 years old, was using a lot of hands-on learning, was using a lot of teaching with different learning styles. And so the technology certainly is helpful, but I just want to encourage anybody that does not have the access to it, that maybe they foresee somebody else having, to feel like, oh, my child isn't going to, meet up in the end. When I was in the 10th grade, our teachers here went on strike for a month and a half. I wasn't in school. And we're here to talk about it. My daughter missed, when she was in 4th grade, I guess my son was first, second, third, fourth. We missed 20 days that year due to snow.
Wow.
Closing snow. And back then there were the computers. The teachers were putting work in folders, and we would put a note on it, do not open unless there was snow. And then we would be out for a week, 2 weeks at a time because of snow. And the kids would open the packets and they would do their work. The other thing I was going to say is for parents to keep in touch with their teachers, even if they're not doing e-learning. Somebody just this morning, someone that I've met, but is over in Nigeria, in Abuja, he said that the school is emailing the work. So even though I wasn't quite sure, it did not sound like they were doing face-to-face e-learning or using Google Classroom or some of these other things. The teacher was emailing the work. And a lot of people don't know this, but if you have a phone, I believe both iPhones and you'll speak to this better than Android, where you can take a scan using your phone, and it becomes a PDF document that can be sent to parents. So if you're a teacher listening to that actually is something that I just recently learned myself. I was always just taking a photo. I didn't realize that my iPhone could also do a scan and put it into a PDF document. So my students may not have their textbooks at home, but I can scan my textbooks and send it to them via email. So even though you may not have, a program that the school is using, they certainly, most people would be able to at least email.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wow, that was super insightful. I want to welcome Abimbola Ogundere for joining us. Good years for joining us, and Mercy Brenda Idahosa Ajayi. You're welcome. I want to welcome everyone that joins in between. And look, I don't know if I want to say that I'm benefiting more than anybody right now because I've gotten so much knowledge, And it's always great to learn as lifelong learners. It's very great. Thank you so much for that response. Now, the last but not the least is, now the thing is, some schools have started with them in Nigeria here, and parents, there is this debate, should parents still pay the regular school fees? Do parents feel that they are getting the return on investment for whatever school fees they are paying. Should they pay? So there is this dilemma that the school owner is facing this dilemma, the parent is facing this as well. So what's the advice here? Should parents be paying school fees or...
Yeah, we have, because I'm in a Christian school here, so my students are paying school fees. I think that, yes, you should still pay your school fees. I think I'm not a school owner, but I will stick up for our school owners. Probably in my saying that, I'm more sticking up for our teachers. I know personally, I just took on, some people that know me know that I came home to help take care of my parents, and I took on a part-time job just because this is what I love to do. But honestly, this teaching remotely is taking me easily twice, if not 3 times, the amount of preparation when I was going into class. And so I think parents really need to understand, yes, this is a lot on you. No one is saying that it's not. However, it is also a lot on your teachers. And the good teachers are putting in not only what they normally would, they are putting in beyond, because most of us were not trained to be. Now, I love technology. I brought Google Classroom to the school, to Nathan American Academy when I was in Benin City. I used Google Classroom back here in the States when I was teaching at my public school job. But we were not trained to do this remotely. We were trained to do this within our classroom, to use it as a tool, in a classroom situation with children that were there, where we're walking around and we're looking over their shoulders, and maybe we have 20 students doing 20 different things, but we're there to monitor it and to have live conversations. We weren't trained to be computer programmers to develop remote curriculum. And we were handed that overnight. And so your teachers are not only teaching, but they're also learning new skills on the fly, as fast as they possibly can. And they are inundated and overwhelmed with the amount of choices that are out there. Google Classroom, I'm hearing Seesaw for younger kids is better than Google Classroom. But this is all trial and error. And so, I think from both sides, we just need to be really, really patient with each other and really understanding. And I think teachers need to understand the implications this has on families, and the parents need to understand the implications that it has on the educators. And so I think communication is really, really important here, because again, everyone's situation is different. I call parents and I start the conversation. Their level of anxiety is here. You can hear it in their voice. And for me to just say, I understand, 30 years from now, this isn't really going to matter. So just take a breath. It's okay. We're going to get through this. This is not forever. It's going to be okay. And when I say that, I can just hear in their voice the level of anxiety drop, and just, I think we just need to realize this is not regular school. We're not going to cover the regular curriculum in the regular way. And that's okay. There's a lot of different ways to learn. And it's an opportunity to maybe learn new skills that I was telling kids today, learn to sew, learn to cook, learn to, draw, my students were telling me they were bored. I was telling you earlier how my students thought that it would be best if teachers just didn't give them any work at all, but just let them come on Zoom and hang out with their friends. They thought that would be a really good solution. So, I think there's, kids are dealing with this in a certain way too. So I think parents, be patient with your children. Teachers, be patient with your parents. Parents, be patient with your teachers. But school fees, I think, should be paid if you're able to. A lot of people have talked about this. Obviously, there are going to be circumstances that are difficult. I think school owners need to be gracious to those people that have always paid their school fees on time and have always been diligent in doing that, that if that if their parents are going through difficult times, that the school owners should be understanding of that. But again, communication is key for that. But the teachers need to be paid. The teachers, especially over in Nigeria, the teachers need data. They need to be provided with however that looks for different schools, Wi-Fi options that they can have. And so all of this costs money. On the flip side, if parents are needing to buy more technology, it's impacting them as well. So I think school owners and parents probably need a Zoom meeting where they can come to an agreement. I believe my school, the policy is when parents come, that they're paying for the entire year. So if you've made that contractual agreement, then you've made that agreement, and in good faith, you need to honor that agreement in paying your school fees. But if you can't buy food for your family, that's easy for me to say, oh yeah, pay your school fees. But if you're in a position where you're talking about feeding versus school fees, then that's a different conversation that I think parents need to have with their school owners.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karen Delgado. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot, and I believe our audience have learned so much. This last question is very crucial, and it's in fact, a lot of people are going through serious arguments right now with that, So, but like you said, there should be a good communication line between parents, between teachers, and even the children, who are stuck in the middle. So that everyone needs to be heard, and everyone needs to be to understand that the pressure is up for everyone. Every party is being affected, but the workload for teachers right now is like triple the usual, so fees need to be paid. If you can't pay the school fees, if you can't pay, then there should be a communication instead of just staying away. Some parents might just stay away and say, oh, thank God she's not seeing me. Thank God we're at home. So it's easier to just keep quiet. No, I think for the child's education to be effective, there should be a healthy communication between parents and the school. I want to thank you so much again. I cannot say thank you enough, and for all our audience that are watching, I want you to actually follow Miss Karen Delgado. Her Instagram handle is Galatians 610. Galatians _6_10. 6 in figures, 10 in, am I correct? I think 6 in words, 10 in words, yes. Galatians 6:10. Galatians _6_10. Oh, awesome. Okay, though we're looking at
it. That's not the right way, but it has to be for SIS.
Yeah. Okay, but you can see her. You can see that you can follow her easily. I want you to follow her on Instagram, and she has a lot coming up. She has so much in store. And look, you cannot follow someone of value and be the same way. I myself have benefited so immensely from her personality. If you're a school owner, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, look, get attached to someone that has the right knowledge, And I want to thank you again so much. You answered all our questions satisfactorily. Now I know we spent
to do this. It was a joy for me to do this. I said it was a joy for me to do this. And if anyone has any questions, I love helping people. I love helping educators be better educators. And so if there's anything that just DM me on my Instagram. I use that primarily. Facebook, I kind of keep more for my personal life, but Instagram is my public format. So you can send me messages there, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that people have. If you missed something that I said or want more specific, I'm more than happy to share.
Well, thank you so much. So does anybody have any questions? Just one. If you have a question, as a parent, you're battling with child education, and you feel you need to ask a question, Ms. Karen is here, and she will be so willing to answer you. I'll just give you 30 seconds to indicate. And if you do not ask, then we'll wrap up this session. It's been wonderful. It's been very wonderful. It's been very, very wonderful.
Are you going to post this online? Will this be up for 24 hours?
No, what I'm going to do is I'm going to record this video and post it as a full video. So it's going to be seen beyond 24 hours. So,
okay.
Yes.
Okay, what yes. do you do? You do YouTube? Do you have a YouTube?
No. Okay, I intend using a mobile application to record the session. So when I record my screen, I'll be before the 24 hours, I will record my screen, covering the session and post it on the Facebook community and on Instagram and also share it with you.
Okay, thank you. That's good.
Yeah, you're welcome.
This is the great thing about of things is we learn from each other.
Yeah, thank you. CJ, you're welcome. Exclamations, you're welcome. Okay, so
friends, my good Nigerian friends. I'm wearing my
wow. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Yeah. Okay, I want to say we're signing out. Bye.
Thank you for stopping in. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.